Across different periods of story and many parts of the world, there have been rare cases that seem to challenge what we normally expect from the natural process of change over time. And among the most intriguing of these are reports of human body that appear to remain preserved far longer than usual. In most situations, the human body naturally changed after death, following a process that had been studied and understood through science, where environmental condition and biological activity gradually alter its structure. This process is considered a normal part of natural cycle, something that happens constantly under ordinary circumstances. However, there are documented cases in which this expected pattern does not seem to occur in the same way, leading to observations that feel unusual and difficult to fully explain at first glance. What makes this case especially interesting is not only the condition of the remain, but also the consistency in which similar reports appear across different cultural and historical periods. In some accounts, bodies are described as remaining intact for extended period, with features that appear lasting that's expected given the time that had passed. This observation have been recorded in various ways, including written document, historical record, and factors that connect them. At first, the idea of bodies that do not decay in the expected way can seem surprising, and it is often interpreted as something outside the usual boundaries of scientific explanation. In earlier time, when knowledge of biological process was limited, such cases were sometimes seen as extraordinary or symbolic, leading to interpretation that reflect the belief of the time. This interpretation became part of cultural narrative, shaping how the phenomenon was understood and remembered. Even today, the unusual nature of these cases can lead to a wide range of explanation, some based on science and others influenced by perception and interpretation. As scientific understanding had developed, it had become possible to explain many of these cases through natural processes, even if the results still appear uncommon. Factors such as temperature, humidity, air exposure, and the presence of microorganisms all play a role in how the human body changes over time. When these factors are altered in specific way, the process can slow down significantly, leading to preservation that may seem unexpected. In some environments, these conditions occur naturally, creating situations where the body remains relatively unchanged for long periods without any artificial intervention. Despite this explanation, the topic continued to attract attention because not every case is immediately clear or easily understood. In some situations, the exact condition that led to preservation may not be fully known, especially when the event occurred in the distant past. This uncertainty leaves room for the interpretation, allowing different perspectives to develop around the same set of observation. Why science provides a strong framework for understanding the general process, the detail of individual cases can still raise questions that encourage further investigation. Another important aspect to consider is the role of human perception in shaping how these cases are viewed. Once something appears unusual or unexpected, it naturally draws attention and can be remembered more clearly than the ordinary event. Sometimes this account can become more widely known, especially when they are shared through storytelling or media. This does not change the physical reality of the situation, but it does influence how the phenomenon is understood and discussed, sometimes making it seem more mysterious than it actually is. At the same time, It is important to approach the topic with a balanced perspective, recognizing both scientific explanation and the reasons why these cases continue to feel unusual. Rather than viewing them as something completely outside the natural world, it may be more accurate to see them as example of how natural process can produce expected results under specific conditions. This approach allows for a clearer understanding while still acknowledging the sense of curiosity that this can imply. As we begin to explore this topic in more detail, it becomes clear that the question is not simply about whether bodies can remain preserved, but about how and why this happens, and what is revealed about the interaction between biological process and environmental conditions. By examining the background of these cases, the different types of preservation, and the scientific explanation behind them, it becomes possible to move beyond initial impression and develop a deeper understanding of what is actually taking place. In the end, the idea of body that never seem to decay is not just about the physical condition of the remains, but about the way humans respond to situations that do not match their expectation. It reflects the balance between what it knows and what is still being explored, and it is within the balance that the topic continues to hold attention, inviting further thought rather than offering a single final answer. One background to understand how the idea of body that seemed to resist natural change developed over time, it is necessary to look at the historical background in which sense observation first appeared. In earlier period, long before modern science provided clear explanation, people relied mainly on direct observation and shared experience to interpret what they saw. When a situation did not match what was normally expected, it often became something worth remembering and passing on. Over time, these observations were recorded in different ways, forming a collection of accounts that would later be studied more closely. In many parts of the world, reports of preserved human remains began to appear in historical records, sometimes describe a level with detail that suggests careful observation. This record often note how the body looked, how it had been resolved, and the condition in which it was found. However, without scientific knowledge available today, the reason behind these conditions were not always clear. As a result, these cases were often interpreted through the lens of cultural belief, which could influence how they were understood and remembered. In some traditions, preserved bodies were seen as meaningful beyond just physical condition, sometimes associated with idea of purity, importance, or special status. These interpretations did not necessarily come from the physical evidence itself, but from the way people tried to make sense of what they were observing. Over time, these meanings became part of narrative surrounding certain cases, adding a layer of interpretation that went beyond simple observation. At the same time, there were no practical observations that pointed toward natural explanation, even if they were not fully understood at the time. People noticed that in certain environment bodies seem to remain preserved longer than in other indirect reason. For example, the lack of moisture appeared to slow down the usual process of change. In colder area, low temperatures seem to have a similar effect. Why these patterns were not always explained scientifically, they provide early clues that environmental conditions play a significant role. As knowledge gradually expanded, especially with the development of scientific study, this early observation began to re-examine in a more systematic way. Researchers started to look at the specific conditions surrounding each egg cases, including temperature, air exposure, and the presence of microorganisms. This shift from interpretation to analysis marked an important step in understanding how preservation occurs, moving topic from mystery toward explanation. However, not all cases were easy to analyze, especially those that occur in distant past where detailed information was limited or incomplete. In these situations, it was often difficult to determine exactly what conditions were present, leaving some questions unanswered. This lack of complete information contribute to the sense that certain cases might be unusual or difficult to explain, even if similar outcome could be understood in other contexts. Another important factor in the development of this idea is the way information was shared and preserved. In early times, many accounts were passed down through oral storytelling before being recommended in written form. During this process, details could change or become more emphasized, depending on what the storyteller considered important. This does not mean that the original observation was incorrect, but it still suggests that the way it was presented could evolve over time, influencing how it was later understood. As communication between regions increased, this account began to spread more widely, allowing similar observations to be compared across different cultures. This broader perspective makes it possible to identify patterns such as the connection between preservation and environmental conditions, even if those connections were not immediately clear in individual cases. Over time, this accumulation of information helped build a more complete picture of the phenomenon. Human perception also play a role in shaping how these cases were remembered. Unusual events tend to stand out more than ordinary ones, making them more likely to be recorded and shared. This can create the impression that such cases are more common or are more mysterious than they actually are, simply because they receive more attention. At the same time, the detail that make a case unique are often highlighted, while more common explanation may be less emphasized. By examining the background and origins of this report, it's become clear that the idea of bodies that do not decay as expected did not come from a single source. Instead, it developed gradually through a combination of observation, interpretation, and the way information was shared over time. Each factor contributes something to the overall understanding, creating a topic that both grounded in real experience and shaped by the way those experiences were perceived. In the in the end, origins of this case reflect broader process by which humans try to understand the world. When something appears unusual, it invites tensions and interpretation. It becomes possible to move beyond initial impression to begin to understand the underlying process that may be responsible. Two, type of preservation. As more cases of preserved human remains have been observed and studied over time, it had become clear that not all of them follow the same patterns, and understanding the different type of preservation is an important step in explaining how this unusual situation occurred. While the result may appear similar at first glance, its body remaining intact for longer than expected, the process behind them can vary significantly depending on environmental conditions and other factors that influence how the body changes over time. By examining these different types, it's become possible to move beyond the idea of single explanation and instead see preservation as a range of outcomes shaped by specific circumstances. One of the most commonly recognized forms of the preservation is natural mummification. which occur when the environmental conditions slow down the usual biological process that would otherwise lead to change. This often happens in dry environment where moisture is limited. Sufficient moisture, the body gradually loses water, and this lack of internal and external humidity can prevent the typical change that would otherwise take place. As a result, the overall structure can remain recognizable for a long period, even though subtle internal change may still occur over time. Cold environments provide another important example of how resorption can take place. In regions where temperature remains low for extended periods, the activity of microorganisms is significantly reduced, which slow down the natural processes that affect the body. In this condition, the resorption cannot occur because the factor can normally dry change are limited by net temperature. While this does not completely stop at all biological activity, it can delay it enough to create results that appear unusual when compared to what is typically expected in moderate climate. There are also environments with unique chemical properties that can influence reservation in different ways. Certain types of soil or water can create conditions that affect how organic material change over time, something slowing down the process to altering it in ways that result of overall structure. In this case, the surrounding environment play a direct role, interacting with the body in ways that may not be immediately visible, but still have a significant impact on the final outcome. These chemical conditions can vary widely, making each case somewhat unique even if the general results appear similar. Another form of resorption involves situations where the body is protected from external factors such as air exposure. While access to oxygen is limited, the process normally contribute to change that can be reduced, leading to shower overproduction. This type of preservation may occur in enclosed space or environments where external interaction is restricted, allowing the body to remain relatively stable for longer periods than expected. It is also important to recognize that in many cases, preservation is not the result of a single factor, but rather a combination of conditions working together. For example, a location that is both dry and cool might create a more effective environment for preservation than either condition alone. Similarly, the interaction between temperature, humidity, and chemical properties can produce outcomes that are difficult to predict without detailed analysis. This combination factor help explain why some tastes appear more unusual than others, even when they share certain similarity. At the same time, there are situations that seem less straightforward, where the conditions that led to reservation are not immediately clear. These cases often attract more attention because they appear to differ from what is commonly understood. However, when examined more closely, they often still involve natural processes, even if those processes are not fully documented or easily observed. The lack of clear information in such cases can create the impression that they are beyond explanation, when in reality they may simply involve factors that have not been fully identified. Human perception play a role here as well. As people tend to focus more on cases that appear unusual or unexpected, when a preserved body does not fit the typical patterns, it is more likely to be remembered and discussed, which can make it seem more mysterious than cases that follow more predictable conditions. This selective attention contributes to the overall perception of phenomenon, shaping how it is understood over time. As scientific methods have improved, it has become possible to analyze these different types of preservation more accurately, identifying the specific conditions that contribute to the escape. This had helped more topic away from general assumption and toward a more detailed understanding of the process involved. Why not every case have only be constructed? The ability to study patterns across multiple examples provide valuable insight into how preservation occurs. In the end, the different type of preservation show that the idea bodies remain intact is not based on single cause, but on a variety of natural processes that can produce similar results under the right condition. By recognizing these differences, it's become easier to understand how such cases can exist without requiring explanation that go beyond what is known. At the same time, the variations between cases ensure that the topic remains interesting, at each example offer an opportunity to learn more about the complex interaction between the human body and its environment. When examining cases of preserved human remains from a scientific perspective, the focus shifts toward understanding the natural processes that control how the body changes over time and how certain conditions can slow or alter those processes. Rather than viewing preservation as something outside the boundaries of science, it becomes possible to say it as a result of a specific environmental and biological factors working together in ways that are not always immediately visible. By breaking down these factors, science provides a clear explanation for why somebody appears to remain in fact for longer than expected. Under normal conditions, the human body undergoes a series of natural changes after death, influenced by internal biological processes and external environmental conditions. Microorganisms play a key role in this process, as they contribute to the gradual breakdown of organic material. At the same time, factors such as temperature, moisture, oxygen, and the surrounding environment determine how quickly these processes occur. When all of these elements are present in typical amount, the process follows a pattern that is relatively consistent and predictable. However, when one or more of these factors are limited or altered, the process can change significantly. For example, in environments where moisture is very low, microorganisms struggle to survive and function effectively. Without sufficient moisture, the ability to break down organic material is reduced, leading to slower overall progression. That is one of key reasons why dry environments are often associated with natural preservation, as the lack of water creates conditions that are less favorable for biological activities. Temperature is another critical factor. In colder environments, the activity of microorganisms slow down, which in turn reduce the rate at which the body changes. While this does not completely stop the process, it can delay it enough to produce results that appear unusual when compared to what is typically expected. Similarly, in extremely stable environment where temperature does not fluctuate significantly, the consistency of condition can contribute to long-term preservation. Oxygen level also play an important role. Many of processes can contribute to change depend on the presence of oxygen, and when access to oxygen is limited, this process can be reduced. In enclosed or sealed environment, Where edge exchange is minimal, this limitation can slow the progression and help maintain the overall structure for longer periods. This is one reason why certain location or condition can produce preservation that seem unexpected at first glance. Chemical factors within the environment can further influence the outcome. Certain types of soil, water, and surrounding material may contain substances that affect how organic material change over time. This substance can alter the balance of microorganisms or create conditions that are less suitable for their activity, contributing to the preservations in ways that are not immediately obvious. Because these chemical conditions can vary widely from one location to another, they add another layer of complexity to the process. It is also important to recognize that preservation often results from a combination of these factors rather than a single cause. For example, a location that is both dry and cool, with limited oxygen exposure and specific chemical properties, may create a much stronger preservation effect than any one of these conditions alone. This interaction between multiple factors help explain why some cases appear more striking than others, even when they are all based on natural processes. Another aspect of scientific explanation involves the initial condition of the body and the surrounding environment at the time preservation began. Small difference in timing, exposure, or environmental change can have a significant impact on the final outcome. Because of this, even similar environment can produce different results depending on the specific circumstance of each case. This variability can make it difficult to predict exactly how resolvation will occur, contributing to the perception that some cases are unusual and unexplained. Modern scientific methods have made it possible to study these processes in greater detail, using tools and techniques that were not available in the past. By analyzing environmental conditions, biological activities, and physical change over time, researchers can identify patterns that help explain how resolvation occurs. Why not every case that fully reconstruct, especially though from earlier periods? The overall understanding of these processes continue to improve. Despite this progress, some cases still appear less straightforward, often because complete information about the environment or conditions is not available. In this situation, it might be difficult to determine exactly which factors were responsible for preservation, leading to a sense of uncertainty. However, this uncertainty does not necessarily mean that the process is beyond explanation, but rather that the available data is incomplete. Human perception can also influence how these cases are interpreted. When a result body appears different from what is typically expected, it naturally draws attention that can seem more significant than it might be when viewed within the broader context of known processes. This focus on unusual outcomes that contribute to the idea that such cases are rare or mysterious, even though they may still be consistent with natural explanation. In the end, the scientific perspective shows that preservation is not the result of unknown or unexplained force, but of natural forces that can produce a range of outcomes depending on specific conditions. By understanding how factors such as moisture, temperature, oxygen, and chemical environment interact, it becomes possible to explain why some bodies appear to remain intact for extended periods. At the same time, the complexity of this interaction ensures that each case remains unique, allowing the topic to retain a sense of curiosity while still being grounded in scientific understanding. 4. Human perception and belief. One scientific explanation provides a clear and structured understanding of how preservation can occur under certain conditions. They do not fully explain why these cases continue to feel so unusual or why they attract such strong attention over time. To understand this, it is necessary to look beyond the physical process and consider the role of human perception and belief, which shape how these cases are interpreted, remembered, and shared. The way people respond to something that does not match their expectation play a significant role in turning an uncommon natural outcome into a lasting topic of discussion. Human perception is naturally drawn to patterns, especially when those patterns appear to break away from what is considered normal. In everyday life, people become familiar with certain expectations about how the world works, including how the human body changes over time. When a situation does not follow these expected patterns, it stands out immediately, creating a sense of curiosity and sometimes even surprise. This reaction is not based on the absence of explanation, but on the difference between what is expected and what is observed. Once an event is recognized as unusual, it's become more likely to remember and share. Cultural beliefs also play a major role in how these cases are interpreted. In different societies, preserved bodies have been viewed through various lenses, sometimes associated with idea of significant respect or symbolic meaning. This interpretation do not necessarily come from the physical condition itself, but from the framework of belief that people use to understand what they observe. As a result, the same type of observation can be understood in different ways depending on the cultural context in which it appears. At the same time, belief system can influence what detail are considered important. In some cases, attention may be placed on the condition of the body itself, while in others, their focus may shift to the circumstance surrounding its preservation. This selective attention can shape the narrative, emphasizing certain aspects while leaving others less explored. Over time, these choices contribute to overall perception of the phenomenon, making it appear more consistent or more mysterious than it might when viewed from a purely scientific perspective. Another important factor is the way information is presented in modern media and storytelling. When unusual cases are shared through documentaries, articles, or online contents, they are often presented in a way that highlight their most interesting elements. While this helps attract attention, it can also create a sense of mystery by focusing more on what is not immediately explained rather than only what already understood. This does not mean that the information is incorrect, but it does influence how the audience perceives the situation. Human memory also plays a role in shaping this narrative. Over time, detail can change slightly as stories are remembered and retold, sometimes becoming more simplified or more focused on key moments. This process does not necessarily distort the original event, but can alter how it is perceived, especially when the story is shared across multiple generations or through different forms of communication. As a result, the perception of a case may evolve, even if the underlying facts remain the same. In addition, people often seek meaning in situations that appear unusual. When something stands out from the expected patterns, there is a natural tendency to look for an explanation that goes beyond the obvious, even when a simple explanation may exist. This search for meaning can lead to a range of interpretation, some grounded in science and others influenced by personal or cultural belief. The coexistence of these interpretations contribute to the ongoing interest of the topic as different perspectives continue to interact. It is also important to consider that not all cases are equally documented. In situations where information is limited or incomplete, there is more space for interpretation, which can increase the sense of uncertainty. Without clear detail about environment or conditions, it may be difficult to fully explain why preservation occurred, allowing different ideas to develop around the same case. This lack of complete information can make certain examples appear more unusual than they might be if all factors were known. At the same time, human tendency to compare new information with existing knowledge and influence how these cases are understood. When a result body do not match familiar patterns, it can seem more significant, even if it is still consistent with natural process. This comparison between expectation and observation is a key part of how perception shape understanding. In the end, human perception and belief do not change the physical process behind observation, but they play a crucial role in how those processes are interpreted and remembered. The influence with Kate are highlighted, how they are described, and what meaning is assigned to them over time. By considering this perspective alongside scientific explanation, it becomes possible to develop a more complete understanding of why the idea of bodies that seem to result natural change continue to capture attention. Rather than existing purely as a scientific phenomenon or purely a matter of belief, the topic sit between these two areas, shaped by both what we can observe and how those observations are understood. It is within this balance that the subject continues to remain both explainable and intriguing at the same time. Despite story and controversy, even after considering the scientific explanation and the role of human perception, the topic of result body continued to generate range of theories and ongoing discussion. This is largely because not even case is equally well documented. In some situations, the available information is limited or incomplete. When detail about environment, timing, and condition are fully not fully known, it creates space for different interpretation, allowing multiple explanations to exist at the same time without being fully confirmed or dismissed. One of the most widely accepted viewpoints is that all cases that belong to preservation can be explained through natural process, even if their processes are not always immediately visible. According to this perspective, factors like temperature, moisture, oxygen level, and environmental chemistry interact in ways that can slow down expected change. In many documented cases where detailed analysis have been possible, these factors provide clear explanation, reinforcing the idea that preservation do not require anything beyond known biological and environmental conditions. At the same time, there are theories that focus on specific elements within this broader explanation. Some emphasize the role of environmental conditions more strongly, suggesting that certain locations may be consistently produce preservation due to unique combination of climate and surrounding material. Others focused on timing on event, proposing that small difference in how and when conditions change can have a significant impact on the final outcome. This approach do not contradict scientific understanding, but rather attempt to highlight complexity of the process by examining individual factors in greater detail. There are also perspectives that pay more attention in on the limit of current knowledge. While science had made significant progress in understanding how preservation occurred, it is still possible that not every detail is fully documented in every case. Some researchers suggest that there may be additional environmental interaction or biological processes that are not yet completely understood, especially in rare or unusual conditions. This does not imply anything beyond natural explanation, but it does recognize that scientific knowledge continues to evolve over time. In contrast to this evidence-based approach, there are also more speculative interpretations that attempt to explain preserved body in ways that go beyond current scientific understanding. These ideas often arise in situations where the available information is unclear or where certain details appear unusual. Why such theory attract attention? Because they offer alternative explanation. They are generally not supported by verifiable evidence. However, their presence continue to the overall discussion by highlighting the gap between what is known and what's still in question. The existence of this different theory naturally lead to the controversy, not because the phenomenon is out to dispute, but because of how it is interpreted. Scientific perspectives rely on measurable data and repeatable observation, while other viewpoints may be influenced more interpretation, belief, or the desire to explore possibilities that are not yet confirmed. The difference in approach create a range of conclusions, each shaped by the type of evidence considered most important. Another key factor in this controversy is the way information is selected and presented. Some account emphasize the most unusual aspect of a case, focusing on how different it appears from typical expectation. Others highlight the underlying condition that can explain the outcome, placing the event with a broader context of no process. Depending on which detail are given more attention, the same case can appear either mysterious or understandable. This variation in presentation plays a significant role in shaping public perception. Media and modern storytelling have also contributed to the ongoing debate. When cases of result body are shared through documentaries, articles, or online content, they are often presented in ways that increase interest and engagement. This can involve focusing on the most striking detail or framing the situation as a question rather than a conclusion. While this approach helps maintain attention, it can also make the topic seem more uncertain than it might be when viewed purely from a scientific perspective. At the same time, the continued interest in this subject reflects a broader human tendency to explore questions that do not have a simple answer. Even when explanations are available, the presence of unusual detail can encourage further discussion, as people consider a different possibility and compare perspectives. This process is not limited to this topic alone, but it's part of how knowledge develops over time through observation, analysis, and ongoing conversation. It is also important to recognize that uncertainty does not necessarily mean that something is beyond explanation. In many cases, it simply reflects the limit of available information or the complexity of the condition involved. As more data become available and method of analysis improve, some of these uncertainties may be reduced, leading to clear understanding. At the same time, new questions may arise, continuing the cycle of exploration and discovery. In the end, the theory and controversy surrounding preserved bodies are not only about the phenomenon itself, but also about how people approach the situation that are not immediately clear. They highlight the balance between evidence and interpretation, showing how different perspectives can coexist while contributing to a broader understanding. Rather than resolving this topic completely, this ongoing discussion keeps it active, allowing it to remain both explainable and intriguing at the same time. As we reach the end of this exploration, the idea of bodies that seem to resist expected process of change remains a subject that is both understandable and still capable of raising questions. After examining the historical background, the different type of observation, the scientific explanation, and the role of human perception, it's become clear that this phenomenon do not belong to a single category of explanation. Instead, it exists at the intersection of natural process and human interpretation, shaped by both what can be observed and how those observations are understood. From a scientific perspective, many of these cases can be explained through known factors such as temperature, moisture, oxygen level, and environmental conditions that slow down biological activity. This explanation provides a strong and reliable framework showing that preservation is not something outside the natural world, but rather a result of specific circumstances that do not always occur in everyday environment. At the same time, the fact that these conditions are relatively rare, not always clearly documented, can make certain cases appear more unusual than they actually are. Looking at the topic from a broader perspective revealed that the sense of mystery often comes not from the phenomenon itself, but from the way it's experienced and remembered. When something does not match expectation, it naturally stand out, drawing attention and inviting interpretation. Over time, as these cases are shared and discussed, they can take additional meaning, shaped by cultural context, personal belief, and the way information is presented. This process does not change the underlying reality, but it does influence how the phenomenon is perceived. At the same time, it is important to recognize that not every detail of the every case can always be fully reconstructed, especially when information is limited or comes from earlier period. This incomplete understanding leaves room for different perspectives, allowing the topic to remain open rather than fully resolved. While science continues to provide answer and reduce uncertainty, there are still moments where the available data do not tell the entire story, encouraging further thought and investigation. Because of this, the idea of result body do not need to be seen as either completely explained or completely mysterious. It can exist between these two positions where natural process to provide the foundation and human interpretation add depth to the understanding. This balance allows the topic to remain relevant not because it lacks explanation, but because it continues to invite curiosity. What makes this subject particularly compelling is the way it reflects a broader aspect of human thinking. It shows how people respond to situations that do not fit familiar patterns, using observation, reasoning, and imagination to form explanation. Even when those explanations are grounded in science, the experience of encountering something unusual can still create a sense of wonder, reminding us that not everything is immediately obvious at first glance. In the end, the question is not only about how reservation occurred, but about how it is understood. It is about the relationship between what is known and what is still being explored and how that relationship shaped the way they think about the world. These cases serve as an example of how natural process can produce outcome and feel unexpected, and how those outcomes can continue to capture attention even when explanations are available. And perhaps that is what gives the topic its lasting appeal. Not every absence of answer, but the space it leaves for reflection, allowing each person to consider the balance between explanation and curiosity and to decide for themselves how much of the story is fully understood and how much remain open to interpretation.